Well, in response to the last video on stainless steels, I thought what I would do is the video which probably everybody likes to shy away from, that is, except sharpening specific channels, and that is about sharpening. So I'm going to title this video Sharpening 101. If you're obviously expert at sharpening and very skilled at sharpening, you can switch off now and go do something else. If the sun's out, try and get out safely outside. Just quickly now, I'm going to tell you what I'm not going to talk about, and that's because I've already covered this in other videos, and that is one, using ceramic bathroom type tiles or ceramic high temperature fired tiles to sharpen knives with. It's a cheap way to get a ceramic sharpening stone. I've done videos on that. I'm not going to talk about taking rocks out of the riverbed, from underneath the river or on the riverbed for sharpening stones, sharpening knives rather, because I've already done that too. And what else am I not going to talk about? And I'm probably not going to talk about using belts, sanders, grinders, all that kind of thing. This is really aimed, this Sharpening 101, is if you don't know much about sharpening, you're being put off by it, you're afraid to destroy your expensive knife or even not so expensive knife, it doesn't matter, you're afraid to destroy your knife and make it worse. So let's get going. This is going to be a lengthy video. I'll try to make it, not too lengthy, but I would advise some of this, not alcohol, some coffee, and I'm going to pour myself a coffee now because I don't want to fall asleep. Not that I would fall asleep at this subject, but need to be paying attention. So I've got a whole bunch of knives here, and why they're here is because I want to try to represent the different kind of grinds you can get on knives. So I'm just going to put my specs on now, which Camping Tools needs to wear specs these days. And so I'll start with a bunch of knives over here. I'm just going to grab a few knives. So what I've got representative here is essentially, and we'll have a look at them close up a bit later on, I've got machine ground edges. So these are knives which have a precision bevel. Hopefully it's a precision bevel, which means an angle like this, okay? A bevel placed on the knife, so the angle should be the same on this side it is on this side, and that's done in a machine at the factory. So I have those kind of knives that have that kind of edge on them there. I have knives which do not have a machine ground edge. This is an old Puko of mine. This is what's called a Scandi grind, and we'll talk a little bit about that later on. That was not while the blank was made by being milled. The actual edge was put on by hand on that. I've got one here. Maybe some of you recognize this from recent video. This is a hand ground edge. It's what's known as a convex edge. It's not a convex geometry. It's a flat geometry, but it's a convex edge. Just for those sticklers out there for geometry of knives. And I have here another hand ground edge on this small knife here as well. That's not a factory. It's not done by a machine. And what I mean when it's a factory ground edge, it's done with some sort of grinding wheels under lubrication. The knife is held in clamps, and so that, as long as the machine is set up correctly, that edge should produce an exact bevel on there. And if you remember from geometry, you've got angles, okay, and there are different beveled edges. For example, here on this hunting knife of mine, it's got an exact bevel placed on this, right, on this knife here, because it's done with a machine. To put an exact bevel on, it's very difficult to do by hand. Okay, so yeah, what have I said? So I've got exact bevels, machine ground, hand ground. Now I also want to talk about knives that have the blade is of a different contours on the blade, okay? So for example, this knife here, you see we have, let's hold it around like this so you can see it. We've got serrations, and they're not even in a flat line, they're in a curvature here, and we've got a curvature here for the blade as well too. So you've got two different surfaces there, shapes rather, to contend with when we talk about sharpening knives. And I'll just put that down, I'll pull that out in a minute. And what else? And I've got knives like this. This is an older knife of mine. And this has got a curvature going in the opposite direction here, sometimes known as a recurve section of the blade, and an outward curving section here. And they require different techniques. Alright. Take 3 or what? They'll leave it there. Come on, is it take 3 or
Come
what?
on, start
Okay, right,
talking.
okay, cut it out. Right, okay, so what I want to say firstly about sharpening is not to be put off by it. And yes, you are going to make mistakes. That's just how it is. You know, I started sharpening, learning to sharpen knives. Once I started sharpening, I started learning to sharpen knives, you know, over 40 years ago when I was a kid. And those knives, I was given Swiss Army knives. They were absolutely Swiss Army knives, Wegners or Victorinox. They were Wegners at the time, Wenger. And I had those knives given to me because they were blunt. They'd been abused, the blades. The blades obviously had a factory edge on them. And I was also given a small sharpening stone, not, you know, about the size of this one here. It was made out of silicon carbide. And you know, and I was told to go away and practice. So what could I do? You know, I could look up a book and I could see, you know, that you're supposed to keep a particular angle on the edge. And I could see that partially part of the blade had that angle, so I endeavored to do that. But with a lot of trial and error, you know, I managed to get something sharp there on the knife. Don't be afraid to sharpen your knife. But, you know, if you're new to sharpening, you know, I would recommend starting with a knife. If you're new to sharpening, you're probably going to be new to knives. So, you know, I would recommend starting off with your first knife, that it doesn't have some funky geometry, that the blade is basically mostly flat with a, you know, a bit of one curvature in it, not several curvatures, not serrated edges, and the like, because that will require different techniques. And the problem with that is you can easily be put off. That's the first tip. The second tip is do not, and I repeat, do not try to attempt to sharpen any knife with too fine a sharpening grade, too high a grade. We talk about grit sizes, you know, 300, 400, 500, 600, 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, maybe even 5,000. I don't know. The universe is the limit on these things these days. And if you start off with a really fine one, you will not abrade much material off the knife edge. And the problem is you can be working on it for hours and you'll feel you've gone nowhere. And when you're really learning, you may not have gone anywhere either. That's the other thing. Okay, so I would not advise starting off on some really super high grade, thinking you'll be really cool because it looks really cool when you've got all these experts on YouTube telling you you've got to have the 3,000 grit, you've got to have the, you know, 2,500 whatever to get the mirror polish on the edge. That's great once you're really expert at it. But, you know, before you get there, you know, don't try to use really high grades like that, because if you do, you really will be put off quickly that you're not getting anywhere, not achieving anything. Now, I'm going to only talk about sharpening at home initially here. Later on, I'll try and talk about sharpening in the field, because that's where I do most of my sharpening if I'm going to. It's not at home, and the reason is because I've already spent time at home, you know, sharpening the knives. So I don't want to be taking blunt knives with me out fishing or hunting or camping. It's a waste of time unless you just want to sit around the campfire. Maybe we've got plenty of time to do that nowadays at the moment, but I don't want to be sitting around the campfire sharpening knives in the dark. I want to chill out when I get back from doing whatever I'm doing. So I'm going to just talk mainly about sharpening knives around the home. And one of the best tools you can have are these things. What are these things? These are your Sharpie waterproof marker pen, black. You can have other colors, black, green, blue, red, whatever. Or if you don't have these are waterproof, and I recommend the waterproof ones better. The other ones that you can use are whiteboard markers. So what are we going to do with those? What have they got to do with sharpening knives? Well, we're going to use these to mark the edges that we're going to sharpen. And the reason is because when you're beginning, it can be difficult to see what you have cut off the knife when you've been grounding, material you've cut off, what material you've removed, and what you haven't removed. But if you use stuff like this, you can see, because this will be missing, the ink will be missing from the blade. Okay, and that's really important. First of all, it will tell you whether you're doing anything right. You may not even be sharpening on the wrong. You'll be sharpening on the wrong part of the blade altogether. So this is going to be your friend, your helper. This is absolutely a necessity, I believe, when you're starting off learning how to sharpen knives. The other tip is this, and you can forget all of your good table etiquette about not putting your elbows on the table, because you want your elbows on the table. You want steady hands. You want a good posture. Get in a good seat that you're comfortable. You want to be leaning all over the table, and the reason is when you start to, especially sharpen a bevel-edged knife, you don't want your arms up in the air, because there's no way you can hold that knife. Properly with your arms up in the air like that. You need to be, braced against something, so you can attempt to maintain the same angle on both sides of the blade. That's important. So you need to be sitting comfortably. You need to have good light. I would also recommend, for checking the edge too, a hand loop. If you're really crazy about it. Now you could say, yeah, okay, bush camping tools, you're really crazy. I'm just going to sharpen it and check it on my nail, and that's pretty good. To check it, how it grips on your nail. If it can bite into your thumbnail and not slide off, that's, pretty good sharpness. Hold on, I digress there. Why not use paper to test the knife blade? Okay, well, you've heard this thing about people saying, well, cardboard really blunts knives, and so does paper. Why does that? Okay, so I'll tell you the facts why it does. And it does because in the modern manufacture of paper and cardboard, they often have what's called filler materials in there, and those filler materials are composed of clays. Okay, yeah, clay, that's dirt, in other words. And dirt's got mineral particles in it, and guess what? Rocks generally blunt knife edges. And we're talking about, if it's a really super sharp edge, we're talking about, not atoms thick, of course, but, really, really fine. And when it comes down to hardness, because when we're talking about hardness for knife edges, we are talking about the resistance to friction, the resistance to abrasion. And paper is very abrasive. Okay, so you sharpen up your knife, then you do all the fancy cuts of paper, or cut 10 times through cardboard boxes to see how great you've sharpened your knife up. Then you take that knife away with you, and you realize you go to skin a fish, or you go to cut through a fish to fillet the fish, and it can't even go through the skin of the fish, and that's because you blunted that knife already on the cardboard and the paper that you were, quite eagerly showing everyone how, you sharpened up the knife so well. So I think, if the blade can bite into the edge of a thumbnail like this, I take the blade out, I carefully do this, and I can really do this like this. Now I'm just going to hold it, this is a heavy knife, I'm just going to support it between thumb and forefinger and put that there like that. And then see, I'm going to tilt my, look at that, I'm tilting my thumb quite a lot there because I've got that lump of wood under the table. And it's still biting into the thumb, it hasn't come off. That's an indication that the blade edge is sharp enough to bite into a thumbnail that's sharp enough to go hunting with, in my opinion, and or fishing with. Right, okay, let's move on to the next subject. There are many different sharpening devices, too many to mention here in this video. But one thing I will say is it's not necessary, as I alluded to earlier on, it's not necessary to run out and to buy a 2,000 grit one side, 3,000 grit the other side Japanese waterstone. They're not cheap, and they're certainly not for beginners. And you can't take them out hunting with you and camping. They're just too big generally. Okay, you can if you're camping by a vehicle, but if you're walking in somewhere, bow hunting, whatever, you've got enough to carry, enough to worry about. It's just not necessary. By all means, get someone to buy you one too. They're expensive things. They're great. Can you use silicon carbide type sharpening stones? One that's got a coarse side on, one on fine. Yes, the answer to that is, if you buy a good quality one, the answer to that is yes. Absolutely. So don't let anyone tell you you can't use one, because that's absolute rubbish. Yeah. So with that addressed there, I want to show you just some examples of sharpening devices which I use, and it depends on what I'm trying to do and why I use them. Okay, so one is, this is just a small one, and I'll just, won't say too much about the brands, but this is a Feltneven sharpening stone. It's got a white ceramic side here, which is very smooth, and a coarse side on there. Okay, it can easily be taken out into the field to use that. I have here, this is a diamond impregnated sharpener. It's 1000 grit on this side and 600 on this side, coarse on that side. I've got diamond rods. Okay, you can sharpen things here. It's a rounded profile on one side. You can do fish hooks and a flat side there. I've got this. This is a Japanese synthetic ceramic. This one here. This is really small, very, very handy. This is like maybe 20. This is 20 years old, So, and it gets used a lot. It's very hard. It's probably about 2000 grit on that one, and we'll talk a bit about that later on. What does that mean? It basically means the higher the number, the less it cuts, but the finer edge it can produce. I've got things like this. This is an AccuSharp. Some people absolutely hate these things, and I'll tell you right now. Yeah, some people hate them. Some people are absolutely snobby about them. There are good ones and there are bad ones. I believe this is a good one. This also has a spike on here, diamond covered spike. This was not cheap, and it's got a diamond sided one here too. And it's got two ceramic rods which can be rotated in here. This one allows me to take these rods out and rotate them so I get proper wear on the rods, and it's got two tungsten carbide rods on here. This can be very, very handy, and I'll talk about that in a sec. If you're on a real super budget and you can't afford stones or anything, or these things like this are not cheap, neither are these things, you can get out of an old dot matrix printer. Find somewhere junk, go to a junk store, get an old dot matrix printer, pull out the stainless steel rod that the printer head runs backwards and forwards on, or the like. This is not one out of there, but I've got one somewhere else in another place like that. You need one of these things, and you need some good quality wet and dry paper, some silicon carbide paper. When I mean good quality, I mean, all wet and dry is like saying oils ain't oils. If you put some water on wet and dry, it does fall apart. It's not meant to fall apart. And you're going to wrap that, I'll talk about it in a while, you're going to wrap that around the rod, and because the rod is properly milled, it will give a proper edge on there, and you can use that to do everything on your knife, including, sometimes including serrations, but generally not, but certainly funky shaped blades and flat. So yeah, whether or not you use natural stones like Arkansas stones, I got a bunch of Arkansas stones lying around the house somewhere. They're great though. Some of those stones do not cut. That naviculite's great stuff. That's the actual scientific name for it. It's difficult sometimes to remove really high Rockwell hardened knives with those, but they're great. Totally love Arkansas stones if you can get them. And I first started off actually sharpening after I started on a small silicon carbide thing like this. I graduated, if you like, to Arkansas stones. I had some Arkansas stones bought for me, the various different grades, from soft ones to the harder ones, and I still got them, and I've used them from everything from knives to sharpening arrowheads out in the field. Okay. The other type of sharpening device, just briefly, are things like this, and there's a plethora of devices like this. This one happens to be a Lansky sharpening kit, and let me show you this. So, with these kits you can, I started off with a really basic one, but I've got a ceramic, super fine ceramic stone here, and these are different graded synthetic stones here too, of different kind of silicon carbide. And what this device does is that you've got a clamp in here, and I'll talk briefly about that now. It will clamp onto the blade, and allows you to attempt, and I say attempt, to keep the same angle of which the blade came sharpened with. So now let's get on to that about the angle on the blade. When you get a machine ground blade, it will come at a particular angle. Now there are many ways you can calculate what that angle is if it's not included in the literature. One of those ways is you can attempt to, if it's not in the literature, you can attempt to contact the manufacturer and just ask them straight out what angle do they grind their knives at. You know, if it's a good manufacturer, they'll probably tell you. Maybe even if it's a good manufacturer, they won't tell you because they think it's some kind of trade secret. In the old days, Puma in Germany, they used to include that in their literature. They would tell you what angle it came sharpened at. Now, if we come back to this kind of device, this has a set angle. I cannot change the angle in this. However, you can work out, this is generally these things are set at angles. They might be 22 degrees, they might be 15 degrees. You can check it out and see whether or not it matches this. And I would say right now, I am no snob of these things. If you have a machine sharpened blade and they fit these things, and if you want to maintain the sharpness of the blade with no fuss and have a blade that's going to work and not be a sharpness snob, then these things will work. So how do you know whether it's going to work? Okay, let's take, and I know this does work because I've got it here. Let's take this here. This is a type of goal lock. Okay, and it's a machine ground edge on here. By the way, from the last video I was talking about coatings. This one has this DLC, that's diamond-like carbon. It's like an amorphous diamond material, if you like, on there, which really helps protect against corrosion. It reduces friction, all sorts of things. And I have to say, it's pretty hard wearing how they've coated on here. Anyway, I get sidetracked. So how do we tell? Well, we tell by taking one of our markers, as I said before, and we mark the edge, right? We mark the edge. And if I mark the edge on both sides, this is the easiest and the least technical way to check, do these things comply with one of these sharpeners. I was about to say cheapo sharpeners, but this thing wasn't a cheapo sharpener. And then if you place this thing down and then not force on it, do not, when you're using these, the idea is not to grind the knife across these things. First of all, you're going to destroy these things, and secondly, you're going to bugger up the knife edge. And why is that? Because if you're wobbling and you're not in control when you're dragging the knife through there, you are not going to sharpen the edge properly. So if you take this and then you gently, and you should be able to feel some resistance. And again, I did a mistake there. What was the mistake? Well, hold on a minute. I'm sitting down. You can't do it sitting down, because when I'm sitting down, I can't see the angle I've got here. So ideally, I should be standing up like this so I can keep a check on the angle. No need to change the camera, cameraman, it's all right. Like this. So I'm not wobbling it and keeping it at an angle like that. Now when I inspect the blade, with my eyesight, I need my magnifying glasses, or magnifying thing, and then when I look at the blade, I can see that, hey, guess what? There is no black ink right on the edge. And in fact, the black ink has been removed evenly. That is the key. Has the black ink or green ink or whatever you want to use, has it been removed evenly? Especially on the edge. Now, if it's been removed evenly on both sides, actually what I'll do is, hold on, I've got to wash that because I use this thing for food and I don't want to be ingesting this stuff. Hold on. Okay, so I use this all the time for chopping up food around the kitchen too, and I will forget if I don't clean that off immediately from that black ink, these inks. I don't know how food safe they are. They're not food safe. Anyway, so I digress. So the bottom line is, if it takes off the ink evenly on the bevel, on that angle on both sides of the blade, then it will work for that blade that you happen to have. And I would keep it, because it will work fine. And this thing I know keeps this thing, you know, razor sharp. It's more than sharp enough for many applications. And that's fine. And that way you will remove the least amount of material from your blade, if that's the case. Now I come to talking about if it doesn't fit. Well, if it doesn't fit, if you can't get it to work, then it's not going to be satisfactory at all. Okay, so you've got to go to something else. So you either go to something where you can set the angle with one of these clamping systems, and you can clamp it on the blade and you can change the angle. And these things range from, you know, sub $100 to, you know, around about, you know, I've seen some sharpening, you know, super duper. It looks like it comes out of some science lab or engineering workshop. Sharpening devices, and they can go for, you know, upwards of, you know, $2,000. You know, you certainly can't take them away with you because they're, you know, big things that fit all over the table. As I said, I'm not going to talk about machine sharpening with belts and all that. That'll be for other videos, I think. So yeah, you can do something like that that can set the angle. Now, if you don't have something like this that can keep the angle the same, then you have no alternative. If you're not going to buy one, you can't afford one, is to do it by hand. And there's certainly nothing wrong with that. So a machine ground edge is being precision ground, and you're going to do it by hand. So what do you need to do it by hand? You need one of these marker pens. As I said, you still need to have the marker pen to make sure you're doing it the right way. You need to be in a well-lit area. Let's pick up machine ground edge blade. Here's one here, small hunting knife sort of thing, camp knife. So you need that good lighting, sitting down comfortably, and you need a flat surface. You need a flat surface. This table here, this is no good. I can't just put the stone on this. Why can't I put the stone on this? Because the stone is going to move a bit. The stone's going to move a bit. I need the stone not to move. That's really important. The stone should not be moving. First of all, if the stone's moving, you've got a chance of cutting yourself. You can't put pressure down on it. You need to apply pressure. You need a clear space. This is too cluttered here, really, on here now at the moment, because I can't get my hands and adjust myself right here. But let's pretend it is okay. So if I've got a flat surface, and I know this piece of plywood is flat, so you need some flat surface which is not going to flex. I get out my stone. I put my glasses on so I can see what I'm doing, and I get my knife. Let's just bring the camera over here so we can see a bit. Right, okay, I've just put a blue dry eraser mark on this knife here. This is a factory bevel. It's got a small bevel on either side. And my advice now is that it doesn't actually need sharpening on this one, so I am going to use it on there. You need to, whatever you need to put it on, you need to put it on so it's not going to move. Okay, so that's going to slip on there. That's no good. So maybe I should put it on something a bit non-slip. So whatever you've got, put it on something non-slip. So I'm just going to demonstrate this here. What I'm not going to do is, and I should say this, is that you know, you can't really learn by watching a video as such. You just got to go away and do it. And everybody sharpens things in a different way. It's like writing. Everybody holds the pen differently, you know. But one thing I would recommend is that the stone not be, you know, have your stone set up so it doesn't move. You know, use whatever is necessary to clamp it down, to stop it moving. And there are all sorts of devices for that where you can just, you know, use your brains and come up with something, you know, cheap for that. But the point is, if you've got the blade, and can you see that blade there like that? Yep, okay, so if you've got the blade as big, you've got to be careful not to be going like this with it, okay? You've got to be careful not to be going like that. You've got to get it flat on the stone. And when it's flat, if you just lay it flat, okay, that's, you know, sitting down, you see it's not moving at all because it's on the main part of the blade here. It's not actually on the edge. If I was to scrape it along here and I look at the blade edge, there's no blue ink removed, okay? So what you need to do is you need to get it so you can just feel it biting, so gently. And there it is there, you can hear it too. And if I look at that, I can see, yeah, I can see on there now, it'll be difficult to see on the camera, but I can see there now, it is just started to remove the the ink from the side, and of course it's super extra sharp. Now I said earlier on, of course, you know, not to start off with this, but this knife is already sharp, so I don't want to necessarily take off unnecessary amounts with this coarser one here. But that's what you need to do. You need to be able to grab the knife, hold it comfortably to maintain the angle. There are all sorts of devices you can get, wedges to stick under here. I don't believe it's necessary. Sharpening to sharpen a knife effectively, it requires practice and consistency of the right way. Okay, so you don't, as I said, you know, there's all sorts of wedges that go under the back of the knife to keep the knife at a certain angle. And if you do it like this, you don't need to contact the manufacturer, because you can feel when it starts to bite on there, and you can check. You can check what are you abrading on the knife. This, you know, using these pens, don't be embarrassed about using a pen. You know, don't let anyone tell you that, you know, that's a waste of time, because it's not a waste of time. It's how to not bugger up the edge of the knife. You know, it's a different thing when you're out in the field and you're in a bit of a hurry. If you're trying to sharpen broadheads or something like that, you're not, you know, you might even use something like this, right? And there are broadhead specific sharpeners. That's another story. But at home, you know, like this, keep the blade flat, have a good grip of the knife, make sure you can see and feel. Don't have the radio on, because you need to be able to hear to where it starts to grind on there. So again, keeping it not wings up in the air, okay? Lean on something now, lean on something. You know, maybe balance, you know, practice first without the stone, practice there without the stone, trying to keep the angle the same once you feel which angle that is. Now, obviously, the blade is not entirely straight. It's straight to about here, and then, hey, we've got a curvature. So you can't just push it there like that, like I said, because if you do, you're only going to sharpen a small part of the blade. And I'm going to come to that in a minute. So let's talk now about the shape of the blade and what that means for practicing. Let's put this away just for a second.
Action!
Okay, so while I'm on about edges, and you know, the edge is straight and then it curves, we've got to deal with the curvature yet. I just want to have a, you know, jump out of this for a bit and just say that, present a couple of military-based knives, and you'll notice for these military-based knives, the blade is flat. You know, the actual cutting edge is pretty much flat, and the reason behind that is that they're really easy to maintain in the field, because there's only two flat surfaces on this. You just got to keep the same angle there, and that's it there like that. End of story. The same with this, with the exception of the serrations, right? So it's all flat, and then there. So it's like a chisel, essentially. And that can be seen too, not on a military knife, but I've got, this is another different type of blade shape. This is a single bevel. This is a Japanese knife. This happens to be a Diba. I got when I was living in Japan, and I use it a lot. This is that's why it looks really rusted up and stuff, because it's used a lot. Let's have a closer look at that. So yeah, this is a Diba, a Japanese small cleaver knife, if you like. It's used for poultry and fish. I got it when I was in Japan. I've used it a lot. It's a dual composition on here. This is a softer steel, and this darker region down here is hardened steel. There it is. There you can see where it's been welded onto the back. That's the soft part. This is the hard part. And this kind of knife is easily sharpened. There's a single bevel on it. And to sharpen it, pretend if this was the sharpening stone, is just to rub it along there like that on the flat side. And that will keep that razor sharp on there like that. Okay, so that's a different style altogether. Very easy to sharpen. You don't see this kind of edge, particularly on an outdoors knife. This is a Japanese style kitchen knife. Okay. So just to recap, why I said knives with factory edges that match, you know, one of these things, type devices, or something that I can maintain precisely the edge with something like this Lansky sharpening kit. Well, I don't change them. Okay, I don't try to hand sharpen these totally manually. Well, there's no need to. But there are some knives which I have changed. Let's have a look here. This, of course, came with a factory edge on it, and it was deadly sharp to begin with. and this is from FKMD, sorry, and it's made with N690 cobalt stainless steel. You can harden this stuff, quite hard, and Fox in this case, this is I think about 60. It's at least 60 HRC 60, so it's really hard. Now, the serrations on here. Let's have a closer look at that here. Okay, so the serrations here, this knife, let's see, how old is this? This is some years old now. It's about 10 years old almost, actually. It gets used a lot, as you can see, and I've never touched those serrations ever. At HRC 60, these things just stay sharp, even cutting through, manky rope and that. But the blade did, because I used the blade more often, it did get literally blunt on there. And that was my first mistake when I was learning how to deal with N690 at high rock wool. I let it actually go blunt, not just dull, but blunt. And that was a mistake because at such high rock wool, it can be very time consuming to sharpen. So I needed to start off on quite a coarse grade to do that. And initially, I tried to maintain the edge bevel on this knife. But then I realized there's no way, because it's a big knife, there's no way I could, get this thing to when I was going like this on the stone, like this on the stone, to maintain that bevel. It just was not happening, mainly because of the serrations on there and that. Because you have to remember, when these things are in the machine being sharpened, they might be set vertically like that. There will be two spinning wheels coming underneath that. They can put a precise edge on this thing. You just cannot hold it like that. It's impossible by hand. So I decided I would change the bevel on this and make it, instead of going from something like this, I would make it go to a slightly steeper, a shallower angle, if you like, on there, because it was easier. I didn't have to have the knife up like this so much. Now, some of you might say, well, if you make it too steep, it's not going to last so long. Well, this is so hard. Yes, it will last. There's no problems with that, and I effectively reprofiled the edge, but I used one of these pens, as I said, to do that, to make sure I could do that on there, and with this curvature. Now we're talking about the curvature, so we can apply this to other knives like that. Is, as I said, you just can't push the knife like this, because if you do, you are only, because there's not going to be any blade material cut off past here, sort of thing, okay. And here nothing's going to be cut. So now you have to move the knife at an angle like that, but still maintaining the same angle, not going up and down like this, you see. Not going up and down like that. You have to be in a position where you can do that. Now, the wider your sharpening stone, if I had a sharpening stone that was this wide, that would be even better, because then I don't have to do so much. I can start here and I can go like that and I'm done, you see. Right, I can start there and I can go like that and I'm done. If I have a small stone like this, I have to, move my arm more. And the more you move your arm, the more chance there is of you not maintaining the angle. Okay, so you don't want it, you want to move as less as possible, okay? It's just like anything, the more you move, you can't control that movement, okay? So that's something to bear in mind when you buy your first sharpening devices, just to remember that will help if you're learning to do that. Of course, the smaller blade, it doesn't matter, but a big blade, it does. So I reprofiled that. That was a factory edge. What else did I repro? Now that's very hard. That's about HRC 60, and actually some of the knives that are really high Rockwell, I reprofiled because it was just easier. Even this small one here, this is a early model Strider. This is an ATS 34. It's got a Rockwell of over 60 on it, and there's a little bit of straight part of the blade. It goes from about, it's pretty much straight from here to here, but after that you've got this curvature. I found it was difficult because it was a very steep bevel on there, and I totally reprofiled that on the knife there. It was easier to do. This is one of my favorite knives, actually. This old Fox Trapper. And knives with this, what I call a recurve section in here becoming kind of increasingly popular, I feel, because they're really useful. It's like one giant serration. It's not really, but it's, you know, you notice that serrations have a concave shape to them, and there's a reason for that. I'll talk about that maybe in another video. But these can be really useful for cutting fibrous material. But you cannot use one of these to sharpen. I often get people, how do I sharpen this recurve section? You can't do that because you're just going to destroy it. It's not possible. So how do I do that? How do I maintain this thing being sharp? Okay, you can do it with one of these, but it's tricky. And I don't want to talk about it in this video because that's for another video. You need something round, okay? Something round, because with something round, I can follow that contour like this. You see, like that. I put this down like this at my angle, and I go like this, and I can follow that round like that. But I have to have on here my silicon carbide paper wrapped around here. Now you can secure it in many ways with tape, temporarily, with super glue, acrylic ester super glue, that kind of stuff, which is one way to secure it. You can go the whole hog and buy a ceramic rod and use a ceramic rod to do that. Okay, or you can come back to, where is it, one of these things, which usually has some kind of diamond spike on it, which is quite funny. You can use that as well. Or what else was there? Yeah, I think that was it. If you have a really small one like this, you could use it, right? Okay, but not a big wide stone. You're going to destroy the edge there. You know, you'll defeat the purpose of trying to sharpen it. So again, I would mark that so I can see that I am taking material off. But that's why in the field with something like this, you either have to have two different kinds of sharpening stones, or you've got to use something like this and just touch it up, make sure it's deadly sharp before you go out and touch the thing up. Okay, so that's a little bit different when you're sharpening one of these. I recommend a rod type sharpening. So you can make your own, or you can buy one. Right, well, the other kind of edge is the edge which is obtained, which is hand ground. In other words, the knife makers will be holding onto the knife, blank or whatever, in their hands and grinding an edge on it using a industrial grade belt sander, if you like. It's just a big belt with various different abrasives on the belt, or various different belts of different abrasive material. There's a myriad of different kinds of those things. Now, when that kind of edge is put on the knife, the edge will not be exactly like that. The edge will not be like a straight bevel, because it's not being ground flat, because the belt flexes. Okay, so when you put the knife into the belt, let's see if I can illustrate that here kind of thing. You know, this is the belt, imagine spinning around here, this surface, and the belt's flexible, you know. So if I put the knife blade in there like that, the belt is going to move, okay? And because of that, the edge on the blade, it will describe a different kind of edge, and the edge it will describe is sort of like a convex edge. Not to be confused with an exact convex geometry, because the whole side of the knife, instead of being flat and going to a convex edge, it would have a convex grind on it. I don't have any of those knives with me. Some of the old KNV2s, which I have, and some handmade knives I've got, custom-made knives, are actually a full convex grind to the edge completely. And that's like you see on an axe. If you want to see a convex grind, if you really don't know what it is, look at an axe. Okay, an axe has a convex grind, or at least it should have something like that. Now, if you take one of these, you know, sharpening stones, whatever it is, and you start trying to put a bevel on it like that with a hand ground edge, you're going to bugger it up. You will change the angle, because this is flat. This is flat. This does not move. It does not flex. Okay? So you can use one of these, and I'll talk about it in a minute, but generally not. If you're a beginner, remember I'm talking about this is sharpening like 101. So how do you go about doing that? Well, provided you haven't let it go completely blunt, you can take some thick foam. This is fairly thick foam. Okay? So I can put my thumb and forefinger into that and dent that. And come over here, let's have a look at this, and I'll show you. So you need a bit of foam. If you don't have any foam, because you want to be able to dent into the foam, you can use some leather. We'll talk about using leather in a minute for things. You want some abrasive paper. Okay, some abrasive paper, some silicon carbide paper. It can be any grade you want. The grade will depend upon how blunt you've let the knife go, but preferably you will not have let the knife go too blunt. And what you need to do is with a hand ground edge, because essentially the edge will describe a convex shape. The edge is actually slightly curved to the edge. What you can do is, you can, again, you need to be, clear space in that. And you would mark the blade. Let's just do that. Let's see if we can do that here. I'll take a Sharpie and just quickly mark the edge here. And it's better to use, as I said, a Sharpie that does not rub off like the whiteboard markers, because that way you can't accidentally, because if you accidentally rub it off, you'll think you've sharpened the edge, but you haven't, because you've accidentally rubbed the ink off. Okay, so I'm just going to quickly mark this here. Like that. Okay. So what you can do is, in this case, if you, again, you want to take the knife like this, and you want to press it in slightly. So you've got to take it up at an angle, and if you press it down until you can feel it. Okay, this shouldn't be cut like that. You can see, now I don't know if you can get that camera up on that, but the edge, if I get out let me see if I can have a close-up on that now. Just give me the... So that's one way of doing that. The reason, why do you need this softer material? And the reason is because you've got to put a bit of downwards pressure as you're dragging the knife edge away, and that will cause the paper to hit the edge of the knife. Let me see if I can draw it up here. Right, let's pretend that is our hand ground edge, and you can see it's not a straight, it's not an angle like this. It's got this curvature in here on either side. So the idea is, if you've got a bit of soft foam, and we're going to take the knife, excuse me, in this direction, take the blade back. If we had a bit of foam there, I'm just going to draw it a bit. This is really exaggerated, but it'd be like that. And what happens is, this has obviously got the abrasive paper on the top of this, on this side here. When you depress in there like that, this will follow the contour of the blade and come up to there. Now if you press down too hard on it, it's going to start taking off the tip like that. You don't want to do that, right? That's why I say you've got to mark it. You've got to do it gently and slowly. This will help to really maintain the edge on one of these knives. If you blunt it, as I say, you've got to do it with a coarser material. This is the same effectively as having a belt spinning around. The belt's going to flex in and contour around the edge of the knife. That's why if you were to look at the edge of a hand ground on a belt, the edge is going to be like this. Okay, so what's another way to maintain a blade is fairly sharp, but you want to go crazy sharp on it. The other way is to use some kind of cutting compound on there, and this is what good knife manufacturers do anyway. They get these cutting compounds, they put them on the belt as the belt's going, they rub the block on the belt. If you've done metal work, anyone that's done metal work, you'll always do it. You rub it on a wheel or something like that, and you can use it as it's a polishing compound. And they use different grades of this stuff, and you can buy stuff like this. This particular one here, I rarely use this stuff, but this is actually made by Dremel. It's a US company. This is their number 421. This will not grind large amounts of material whatsoever. It's for polishing really. But how do you do that at home? If you haven't got a belt and you haven't got some Dremel wheels or whatever and you want to do the edge, the easiest way for that is with some scrap leather. You can get some leather, good old leather that's used for stropping. This is, well, this is not the best example actually, so I should show you what's not the best. Just come in here and I'll show you. Okay, this is not the best. Why is this not the best? This is just an offcut I got from a lounge. Because the surface texture is too uneven. Okay, it's too uneven. But if we had a piece of leather that was smooth and flat, let's pretend it is like this, for example, on the back of this here. Okay, smooth and flat. You can put the rubbing compound on that, the polishing compound, and you can use that to strop. And I think we're going to keep that for another video. But you know, you would strop the knife backwards and forwards like that. Again, you can keep a check on the ink, whether you're actually removing it or not, and that way you can get your knife really sharp. You don't even have to use the compound on there if you like. That's for scary sharpness on there. But you can use, yeah, materials like these cutting and polishing compounds rubbed into a piece of leather. Again, if you're going to do that, the leather also has a bit of give in it like the foam, but I would put the leather on a block of wood like this, okay, and do it like that. Okay, so there's one more type of grind on a knife I want to talk about here. Hopefully I haven't forgotten everything that I was going to say, and that is a Scandi grind. And that is on a Scandi ground knife. This is a finished pucco, as I said. You've got a really big bevel, okay, and it goes to a very fine edge on there. There's no like bevel right on the edge. This whole thing is the bevel on both sides. Very easy to maintain because it's such a big bevel. You can just place it flat and again grind like this. You know, even on a, you know, in this motion like this, backwards and forwards. Okay, on your paper, on something like this, or on a stone, preferably on a stone because this is a flat edge. Rather, it's not a, you know, just to maintain it because you will not be, you know, where that angle is like this.